So for those of you who don't know me, my name is Rudy Kimi, and I'm the interim director of the Aerotropolis Institute Africa. And today we are very proud to once again host a dear friend and former colleague of mine, Mr. James Campbell, on our webinar, which is called Mine Your Mind. And what makes today's seminar so pertinent is the fact that it deals directly with one of the most enduring challenges that we are facing in South Africa, and that is unemployment. And the essence of the webinar is to focus on how to build a business. We recognize that there are many young people in South Africa with fantastic and excellent ideas, but an idea is only as good as its execution. So James will talk about how do we take an idea from its conceptual phase towards how to make that idea become, to realize it into either a entrepreneurial venture or something which can be scaled one day to become something more of a entrepreneurial venture. Just a few words about the Aerotropolis Institute Africa. The Aerotropolis Institute is a joint venture between the Department of Economic Development, Tourism and Environmental Affairs of Thekwini Municipality and the University of KwaZulu-Natal. And the primary aim of the Aerotropolis is to generate the knowledge resources that can contribute towards the economic growth of KwaZulu-Natal. So on to our webinar. James, it's an absolute pleasure to welcome you again. And we look forward to hearing from you, drawing from your expertise and experience as a mining entrepreneur, what we need to do, what young people need to do in order to think, conceptualize, but more importantly, how to bring their ideas into practice. So, James, over to you.
Thank you very much, Rudy, and thank you very much to the Aerotropolis Institute and UKZN for kindly hosting me for a second time this year. So I'm deeply honoured, and also for what Rudy mentioned right in the introduction. This presentation is a contribution to try and help the economic situation in this country. Rudy's always very clever with his titles, and when he said "Mine Your Mind," mine had a dual reason here. Mine meant actually get inside of your mind to actually see what can be done in terms of creating a business. But mine also meant, as he mentioned in his introduction, how do you build and create new mines? So what I'm going to be talking to today is about the art and science of building a business. And I'm going to be using as a reference point the art and science of building mining businesses. Now, mining businesses are typically some of the most complicated businesses to build, but there are many common strands between building an exploration and mining business as there are to many other businesses. So I hope following this discussion, and I'm not going to be using any slides, I'm going to be talking to some notes because I find slides, are good, but I will share the notes with Rudy, and Rudy can then circulate those as he sees fit. But I don't want to use the slides as kind of a crutch. I want to talk from experience and from how to set up actually businesses from how I've actually seen it. There are 5 items in my discussion which I'd like to talk about. The first one is how are mines found? That's not going to be a technical discussion at all. I'm not interested in, for this particular discussion on geology and all those kind of political risk. I'm much more interested in the softer business elements of how mines are found, because that deals with the concept of ideation. And that is got many parallels in terms of how are new businesses found, whether it be in the technology sector, biochemical sector, or any other sector. I'm then going to talk about one of the mechanisms which I believe is one of the better mechanisms for stimulating and de-risking growth of new business enterprise, and that is business incubation. Now, sadly, we don't have very many of these in South Africa. There are some in Stellenbosch, which typically focus the technology sector, but there's a whole wealth of opportunity in this country, aside from the technology sector, mining sector, the agricultural sector, the further learning sector, and you're going to be much greater experts in that than I am, where business incubation can actually help. I'm then going to go and give some examples of business incubators. Now, it's all well and good to talk about how ideas are created and business incubation, but I want to give some really tangible examples of how mining businesses were really created and how they can flourish through to the current day. I'm then going to give some case studies of those briefly, because I've been tasked to talk to round about 5 o'clock, no later, maybe a few minutes before, so to allow plenty of time for discussion and interrogation of some of the material. And then I'm going to be leaving you, hopefully, with a few thought-provoking questions in my conclusion and takeaways. And these takeaways are hopefully something that you've already done through the course of my discussion, but also takeaways which maybe institutions might want to embrace in terms of incubating certain businesses. So firstly, if I go into the very first section about how mines are found, if you look in the literature on this, and this means Googling to a large extent, you'll see an awful lot in the literature about desktop analysis, prospecting, funding, licensing, all those kind of hard things. Well, that's after the fact. It's a bit like the analogy, if you're interested in the history of the universe, that everybody knows what happens a microsecond after the universe was formed, but nobody knows what happened actually before then. So what I want to talk about in this first section is what happens before all of that happens, and it's a business concept. So what is the concept of ideation? It's a very fancy English word. It didn't exist when I was at university, but it's basically around about the idea about how do you come up with new and novel and interesting ideas to create a business. I'm not talking about, well, I'm going to build another Mug and Bean franchise at my local corner shop, or I'm going to set up a car wash. Absolutely nothing wrong with that, but that's duplication. It's not ideation. So I'm talking about ideation. How do you come up with new ideas which can actually generate significant employment? Well, ideation is all about forming ideas from conception to implementation. It can be graphical, it can be written, it can be verbal, it can be based on past or present knowledge, it can be based on influences, it can be based on opinions, it can be based on experiences and personal conviction. And often that one tries and engender ideation through brainstorming session, online forums, seminars, surveys, social media, and those kind of things. But in my experience, what typically comes up with the best ideas are when two or more like-minded people get together saying, we would really like to do this, but how do you think we can actually do it? And it's not something, by the way, which is the domain of the CEO. Actually, far from it. The CEOs are typically in the domain of running a business rather than creating a business. So the idea of ideation can be done from anybody, from people at school all the way to people who are creating new businesses actually in their retirement. And I'm not sure if you'll be interested in this, but something that Rudy and I have been looking at, that most of the new businesses in the United States, for example, at the moment, are coming from people who are more my age than perhaps your age, of people in their 60s who have spent their life in corporates and now want to create new businesses as one way of giving back to society. So what does ideation consist of? It typically looks at solving a problem, having derivative ideas, or importantly, having a symbiotic idea. If you have something and you need something for it to make it work. If I give the kind of the biological analogy, you have oxpeckers which sit on the back of oxes, buffaloes, cows, etc. in this country. Why? Because they need the ox with the ticks on it to actually survive. So it's a symbiotic relationship, and the ox needs the oxpecker to be able to pluck the tick away in order for it to survive. So it's a symbiotic relationship, and often that is one of the kernels of ideation. So in my view, what are the 5 different ways we've been thinking about in terms of how do you create business, new business in the mining space? And I hope you'll see analogies within your particular environment too as well. Well, the first one is actually quite obvious. It's technology breakthrough. There's a saying in the exploration business, and I'm primarily a mineral explorer, that every time there's a technology breakthrough, the exploration clock actually starts ticking again. You go back and you look at old areas through the lens of new technology. That new technology could be a new geophysical technology, could be a new geochemical technology, or as you would expect, it could be something like artificial intelligence. We're starting our first largest artificial intelligence program in Botswana, where we have something like a terabyte of data on one side, and we have geological models on the other, and we ask the computer to actually put the two together to see if we've actually missed anything. I'm terrifically excited about it because, you know, we can only do so much, and artificial intelligence will start to begin to look up patterns and will hopefully find us new diamond resources, and I'm a diamond man, but maybe it'll find us a PGM, a copper, or a gold resource too as well. So the first one is a technology breakthrough. The second one is a new application for a mineral. Now, what does that quite mean? Well, I'm sure all of you have heard about the sustainability scenario and the strive towards net zero, and how we must be a lot more green and environmentally friendly. Yes, that's good, but underpinning that is we will have to mine something like 20 or more times lithium than we're currently mining at the moment in order to achieve that goal. Well, the chances of that happening in the next kind of 10 years must be virtually zero, because it takes more than 10 years to actually find a mine. But it doesn't mean that the sustainability goal is wrong. It just means we must think of different minerals in different applications to harness that net zero capability. Let me give you a lovely example of this. I met a lovely young Motswana in Botswana in December of last year, and he was doing a PhD at Oxford in terms of the application of micro diamonds. And of course, the diamond industry in Botswana is huge, and they throw away all these tiny diamonds which are below 0.5 millimeter, well below 0.5 millimeter. And he's come up with some very interesting thinking about how to use these diamonds as conductors in computer technology. And diamonds, after all, are one of the best conductors you can have. So here is a bright guy. He's looked at the diamond industry in Botswana and how phenomenal it is, but he's also seen the companies such as NVIDIA and many others are making an absolute fortune of making conventional chips using conventional technology. But Botswana could take a march here by using the billions of micro diamonds they're actually producing, and producing a far better product at the end of the day. That's the kind of thing I'm thinking about when it comes to application for new minerals. The third one is a change in thinking on geological models. Now, if you know, Many of us would have been to university. I went to university almost 40 years ago. It was good university, very good training, but geological models change. And I'm going to give you an example when I get onto the case study where a change in geological model caused us to look elsewhere. In fact, I'm going to dip into that one briefly now. Many of you may know that diamonds and precious stones come from very old rocks, and that's all they come from. But we discovered diamonds and precious stones in the Rift Valley in Israel coming from very young volcanics. Nobody was interested in this. They thought this Israelis must be a complete scam, nothing there. Geologically, it doesn't actually stack up. Well, it does. The company is called Shefin Israel. Their marketing name is Holy Gems. And essentially what happened is that large ancient crust, which contained diamonds, sapphires, rubies, got subducted and came back up again with young volcanics. So we basically rewrote the geological books there, and people will continue to do that as they think about new and novel things. The fourth and fifth ones are even more opposite to other different environments, a change in political environment. Now, nowhere is this more obvious in South Africa if we look at the pre-1994 and the post-1994. There are very different political circumstances which create very different kind of political paradigms in terms of businesses in South Africa. And then fifthly, a change in economics. We hopefully are sitting at the top of the interest rate cycle. And if one reads the newspapers, interest rates should start to fall. And if they should start to fall, that means the cost of borrowing will drop, which hopefully means the cost of new business entries will start to drop too as well. So there's a change in economic cycle coming up. So any of these things, technology breakthrough, new application for mineral, change in thinking on geological models, change in political environment, and change in economics are all, kind of great examples of where you start your ideation process in the mining space. And as I mentioned earlier, this is not germane just to mining, but can be applied to any other form of business, particularly in the industrial sphere. So the next area I want to kind of get into is business incubation. And why do I want to get into business incubation is that you'll see a lot of adverts going out to the bank saying, oh, we'll lend you some money to help you with your business. Yes, they might lend you some money, but then you're kind of hooked into them and, and they'll make their pound of flesh out of you. But what are they going to do to really help your idea, which has come out from ideation, nurture that idea and help it to grow so eventually it kind of has wings? And the kind of ideas I'm going to be talking about here can be very analogous to the human being. The business incubator helps you give birth to that little baby. When you have a very small baby and perhaps it's premature, and I've had one of them, you put it in an incubator where the oxygen is controlled, the temperature is controlled, and you have intensive nursing and intensive actually other care for that little baby infant. And then you actually feed it a bit more, you educate it, you take it to school, you nurture them through love and care and all of those kind of things until hopefully come their late teens or today in the kind of 20s, they take wings and they fly away. And the whole idea around business incubation is to look at those early stages and help in every single way. And I'm not just going to talk about financing here. Financing will come into it, but there are many, many, many other ways in which business incubators can help. I've already mentioned earlier about the business incubators in Stellenbosch. I think they're pretty informal to a large degree, but they've helped create things like NASPERS, which have been phenomenal stock exchange successes. But if you really want to look at the kind of the archetypal business incubation area, it's in Silicon Valley in California, which is forever coming up with these great ideas, backed by good funding, backed by good leadership, allowing these things actually to grow. And I think there's great opportunity in South Africa to do exactly that. And if one looks at the kind of the four main areas where business incubators get involved, they get involved at academic institutions. What better place of a meeting of technology, of leadership, of access to the community and giving back to the community, and having very clever people running these things and having students actually going through the process. So business academic incubation, particularly offshore, I don't know many in South Africa, and I'd love to learn if there were more, are very popular because it's a melting pot of all these kind of things. Secondly, non-profit incubators. Now, we've got a fantastic social society in South Africa. There are many things we should be grateful for. I think we've got a brilliant free press. We have a very strong civil society, and many of these civil society non-profit organizations were born through incubation actually overseas and then planted in to South Africa. I'm chairman of one called Common Purpose, which is a leadership development organization. And then you have venture capital or for-profit business incubators. And those are the ones I'm actually going to spend most of my time actually focusing on, because I think that's going to hit at what Rudy was looking for about building a business and about looking at how do we address the unemployment problem. Just as a kind of a bit of a disclosure on this, that having worked in a corporate for 20 years, but now having run 4 junior businesses, as Rudy says, I'm a mining entrepreneur. So I built 4 mining companies. There is very, very little been written about the incubation and growth of mining and exploration incubators. So I've just started my doctorate on this subject. So God willing, in a few years' time, I'll have a bit of a blueprint to actually help others who carry on from me actually doing this kind of work, because it's something that we in Africa desperately need, not just dealing with the employment issue, by the way, but one of the things which I'm particularly passionate about, and it's an African Union directive, is how can we increase local percentage interests in mining companies? I'm not interested, for example, and I'm saying this as a form of hyperbole, in government prescribes you must have 28%. Or if you're Starlink, government prescribes you must have 30%. I'm far more interested in local entrepreneurs taking 20, 30, 40, 50, 70, 80%, and for them to enjoy the fruits of it. And that can really only come about, in my view, by having some form of incubation. So if that's a bit of a theory about incubation, and I'm still very much in my early days of doing this. I'm doing it through the Da Vinci Institute because they were one group which actually allowed me to look at the multifaceted elements of this: technology, finance, entrepreneurship, political climate, and all those kind of things, because that's important to me, because this is not a one-dimensional study. As you've heard me so far, this involves everything to build a business, which is everything you can actually possibly think about. So my next section, my third section, and my third and fourth are going to be the slightly longer sections, are examples of mining incubators. And I've only been able to find 3 in the world, would you believe? That's it, 3. One of them is in Ireland, and 2 of them are in Canada, and all 3 have very, very different models. But I think those models will actually resonate with you a great deal in terms of how you might want to get together with your friends, perhaps with the UKZN, Aerotropolis, and others, to actually do something along kind of similar lines. And I've been very, very blessed to having worked for all 3 of them at different stages in my career. So what I'm saying is giving you the inside track on how I felt about it, as well as what they've actually done. And that's one of the main reasons why I'm not giving a PowerPoint presentation, because I wanted to articulate actually how I felt about working for these as well, and share some interesting little anecdotes about it. Just one of them, just to kind of spark your interest, is I worked for the Lundin Group for a short period of time. You may never heard of the Lundin Group. It's worth just under $20 billion. It's worth a hell of a lot more than Anglo American, but its head office is a tiny little kind of top floor of an office block, but it's a $20 billion business. But whereas Anglo's, I don't know how many thousand people they now have in their head office. It's very different. But to move in the Lundin Group, you can move quickly and effectively. In the Anglo, as we've seen from a lot of the press in terms of the potential acquisition by BHP and what they're trying to do from a strategic perspective, is a lot more complicated. Anyway, let me start with a group that I'm currently working with. It's called the 162 Group. Very, very fancy title. It's 162 is after 162 Clontarf Road in Dublin, which is essentially a house. And it's a house where my chairman, who is a serial entrepreneur, has had an office for well over 30 years. And then how he got into this business is he did his PhD in entrepreneurship through Wharton in the United States, and his students challenged him, saying, "Yeah, it's all well and good to have a great bachelor's, master's, and doctorate in this, but have you really built a business? How many businesses have you built?" Anyway, so after he got his PhD, he hasn't stopped. He's actually built over 30 different joint ventures and businesses. He listed the first company on the London AIM market, which is the alternative market for or venture capital market for stocks in London. And he's nudging 80, and he's still as busy as he was and as sharp as he was in terms of his entrepreneurial activity. His name is Dr. John Teeling. And if you want to look at Mining Finance 101, I've got a great YouTube clip of him giving that at the Junior Mining Indaba 3 years ago. It's done in typical Irish inimitable style, which I can't even begin to copy, but it's absolutely brilliant. So what do? It's private. It's run by 3 founding directors. I call them the 3 musketeers, 3 Irishmen, all who have an office, a small office, probably no bigger than this little office that I'm chatting from in Centurion. And where they start from is when they have an idea, or somebody brings an idea to them, and I've dealt with the concept about ideas, they then go to what they call the 3 Fs to fund it. And the 3 Fs are friends, families, and fools. And they make sure that, people participate. So if they come to Joe Soap and say, "Look, I've got this great idea about diamonds in Botswana," and Joe Soap says, "Well, where the hell is Botswana? I know nothing about it. I know nothing about diamonds." The guy will say, "Look, you've made so much money out of me before. I want you in for £10,000. And that's how it kind of works. So there are winners and there are losers in the whole scheme. And here's an interesting point about it. The Times, I think it's about 6 or 7 years ago in the UK, said if you had invested in all of John Teeling's companies and not chosen, you would have outperformed the FTSE 100 index by a factor of 2. So i.e. 200%. Yes, some of those companies may have dropped in share price by 90%, 99%. Some of them may have made 10, 20, 30 times their money. But that's what he does. He looks at these ideas. He gets in friends, families, and fools to fund them. He hires professional management. He gets the best management they can, and he hires them to do the job, and he pays them just enough to get by and gives them lots of options so they can make their money from stocks and shares, not as a lifestyle as you would if you were to work for a corporate where you get extremely well paid as a general manager or something like that. You are well taken care of. But this environment, you have enough to kind of hopefully pay your mortgage and food for the table and education for the kids. But if not, you're going to make that up if you do well on stocks and shares. So it's a much more risky environment. The next couple of things I think are really important. Extremely low overheads. In COVID, for example, we were able to reduce our activity and our total yearly cash burn for a listed company to £364,000. I remember the number because it's audited. So we were able, I work from home. I've worked from home for 20 years. Before Zoom, I was using Skype, which is not wildly different. So you keep those overheads down to an absolute minimum, and you keep all the non-direct, non-value adding costs down to an absolute minimum. So for our business, which is all about exploration and mining, we put as much of that money into the ground as possible. We're also able to make decisions very fast. If I want to call a board meeting for tomorrow, as long as it's okay with the chairman, we can have the board meeting tomorrow and we'll make decisions. Yes, I will have to prepare a short paper and it will get presented and we'll talk about it. We don't need to wait for a quarterly decision-making cycle, and we don't need to have volumes of documentation. So there's a lot more free flow of information and discussion in order to make these things work. And the whole raison d'etre behind this, the business model behind this particular incubator, is you list very cheaply at a very low price with very low overheads, and with successive amounts of work packages, your share price goes up and you raise money at successively higher prices. And I'm going to give examples of that as we go through. That is the business model, and that's how shareholders actually make their money. So just a few examples, so you know the kind of businesses they're in. I run a company called Botswana Diamonds PLC. We're a diamond explorer in Botswana, South Africa, and Zimbabwe. I've run two of John's other listed diamond companies, West Africa Diamonds and African Diamonds. African Diamonds return 25 times to their shareholders. So that's to give you an example. But it's not just minerals. He's focused in petrol resources as an oil explorer in Ghana and Iraq. Clontarf Energy, it has lithium projects in Bolivia. Arkle Resources is looking at zinc and gold in Ireland. Greenore Gold is looking for gold in Scotland. And it's not just minerals. One of his other favorite areas is whiskey. You might have heard of Teeling whiskey. If you haven't, go and buy yourself a bottle and have a drink. You'll be a convert. It is Northern Distilleries. And for nothing, he's now producing 12 million litres a year of the raw product before it actually gets branded. So he's what I call a phenomenal entrepreneur, a serial entrepreneur in any business. And he looks at the business matters. He doesn't give a damn about geology and politics and stuff like that. He looks at the business matters, and he looks at people like me as the managing director to translate all of that into a business manner in which he can actually make sense of. The second one, very, very different kind of company. Equally as entrepreneurial, but a different model. This is called Hunter Dickinson Inc. From Vancouver in Canada. It's also been going for about 30 years. It's got a global reputation as a mine finder. It doesn't do things like whiskey, by the way, and oil, but it's got involved in things like copper, gold, molybdenum, silver, platinum, zinc, lead, tungsten, and diamonds. And that's how I got to work with them in diamonds. And one of the things, if you go onto their website, and it's always quite interesting about how these incubators kind of market themselves. With the 162 group, they talked all about how much value they had created. And with that, it was $200 million. But the strapline with Hunter Dickinson, they talk about $1.4 billion having been raised. And Hunter Dickinson is very much the example I used earlier about birth, about taking an idea and taking it actually through all the different phases. So they provide kind of overarching management, technical, financial, and administrative services to you as a startup. And as you become successful and as you are able to actually kind of harness these things actually yourself, they will actually start to kind of gradually withdraw. They have a methodology. It's more systematic than that of the 162 group, but it's been going for a long time, and they've had a huge number of different success rates, very much focused on Canada and the Americas, whereas the 162 group is happy to get involved in places like Iraq, Iran, Sierra Leone just after the war. I ran West Africa Diamonds just after the war in Sierra Leone, and I think we were the second company to go back there. So it's almost where others actually fear to tread. But Hunter Dickinson had several companies, Curious Resources, El Condor Resources, Continental Gold, Great Basin Gold, Rockwell Diamonds, which I was involved with. So you can look at all of these things. I'll share my notes with Rudy, and you can look at the other kind of companies about how they've been able to nurture, de-risk, and grow mining companies through the kind of overall process. And I'm also going to take one of their case studies and one from the 162 group in my case study section, which is my number 4. And number 5 is the Lundin Group. And this is the group whose analogy I shared with you at the very beginning. And having worked for the Anglo American and De Beers Group for about 20 odd years or so, and then briefly working with the Lundin Group and going to their head office in Vancouver, I was immediately blown away that it was just a passage. Not a very long passage with offices on either side, which was their head office. And at that time, Anglo American had 44 Main, 45 Main, 55 Marshall, number something Fox Street in Joburg. Then they had St. James in London, etc., etc. But a very, very different kind of company. But the Lundin Group was actually bigger in terms of their market cap. And it was started by the now deceased Adolf Lundin over 50 years ago. And it was run by Lucas and Ian Lundin, his 2 sons, for a long time, until Lucas very sadly passed away a couple of years ago with the brain aneurysm. But someone who, like John Teeling, my current chairman, had an immense feel, an immense kind of intuition around mining projects. If I kind of deviate momentarily from my presentation here, when I met with him to do the deal on the mine, which is now producing all these fabulous diamonds in Botswana, the Karowe mine, he invited me to dinner in offshore in, I think it was London or Paris. I can't quite remember what it was, but we had no money, so I had to use my own money to go there. And he poured a lot of good red wine down my throat that night to talk to me, to really get to know me and understand me and my project. And in the morning, he said, in the morning, I will tell you about what I want to do. And in the morning, after a 10-kilometer run, he told me, I'm buying this, and I think you've been too conservative with the diamond value. And I was like blown back. Here is a hugely successful mining entrepreneur. And I asked him, how do you make decisions such as this? He said, look, most corporates spend their life on corporate due diligence and they miss the point. With me, I haven't got time or energy for that, and it often doesn't give the right answers. What I do is I phone up several people who I know who know you. And in the mining industry, there are probably 3-4 degrees of freedom between you and actually anybody else. And I ask them for their opinion on you, on your technical lead, on your finance lead. And I get a good view about, how you are in the industry, because after all, you are the expert, not me. And you came up, all of your people came up fine, so it was fine. My colleague, Professor John Gurney, and bless his soul, he's passed on, said your diamond estimate's too low. Would you agree? And I said, yes, it's way too low. Good, I'll write the check and I'll buy it out now. That's exactly what he did. And he made a bucket load of money from that. And that's how they work. It's a family-run entrepreneurial company with deep entrepreneurs and with great supporting skills which actually sit immediately behind them, without a kind of a big head office kind of bureaucratic structure. So if I look at their current market cap, and as I mentioned earlier, each of these groups has a kind of a strap line. Their current market cap is just under $25 billion. Now, how about that? And they've generated something like $15 billion in value. That's phenomenal, absolutely phenomenal. And it's not just the value they've created for their shareholders, but they're also deeply committed to actually growing the communities around them. Whether it be in the far north of Canada, whether it be in Botswana, whether it be in South America, their foundation follows them in order to make sure they have that deep commitment back. So I'll throw you a few companies which you might want to look at. The one which is in the news at the moment in terms of diamonds is Lucara Diamond. There's Lundin Mining. There is Faraday Copper. There is Bluestone Resources. There's Chamaran Petroleum Corporation. So again, a very different kind of model. Perhaps if I was analogous, it would have been to the business model that maybe sort of Harry Oppenheimer and Sir Ernest Oppenheimer had when they kind of ran Anglo American De Beers without the bureaucracy. Something similar to that. So very, very interesting model. So I'd like to briefly share with you just 3 case studies in terms of how these work. And the first 2 are from the 162 group, and the third one is from Hunter Dickinson. Well, the 162 group followed by actually the Lundin group. The first one is African Diamonds PLC. And how this came about is that a Botswana explorer by the name of Dr. Leon Daniels phoned up John Teeling and said, I've got some fantastic diamond projects in Botswana. I think you ought to invest. And John said, I know nothing about diamonds. I know nothing about Botswana, but tell me more. And so he did. The conversation went along. John was sufficiently energized with this. So he created a company called African Diamonds PLC. He floated it on the London AIM market in 2004. He was also persuaded at that time to invest in diamond projects in Sierra Leone and Guinea, because he had another person who came to him by the name of Jim McGregor, who said, no, this is a great place. Sierra Leone has just come out of a terrible, terrible war. So there's opportunity there, and there's equally opportunity in French-speaking Guinea next door to it. I was brought on as the kind of the professional manager to run it. We spun off the West African assets in 2009 to a company called Stellar Diamonds, which was then bought out by Newfield Resources. We did a reverse takeover, so that could actually follow its own kind of route. And then with African Diamonds, we eventually bought out De Beers in the share of the Karowe mine with Lucas's money. Lundin Lucara Diamond eventually bought us out. But then the long and the short of it is that African Diamonds shareholders made 25 times their money if they were in at the listed company stage. If they were in at a private placement stage, which is typically cheaper, some would have made more than 40 times their money. And that's a very good example of the kind of 162 group business model, the theory, and it kind of working out in practice. And now if you want to see how it's running now, Lucara is a model corporate citizen. They're producing some of the world's most fabulous diamonds in an absolutely shocking diamond market. And it's got a long future ahead of it. And it's going underground now. You always know when you are a little bit older is that when one of your discoveries or rediscovery in this perspective starts to go underground, that you're perhaps looking at the back end of your career now as well. The second example gives a different example of ideation. This is Swala Resources. I was sitting having, I think it must have been a beer, it wouldn't have been a coffee or tea, with the head of one of the large mineral consultancies in Joburg, talking about diamonds, about, what next, good projects, etc. And he kind of casually asked me in the conversation as I was going, are you guys interested in gold? And I said, well, I don't know much about gold really, apart from being a geologist. He said, look, I've got this really interesting gold project in Mozambique. Nobody really wants to touch it. It's got a peculiar geological model. Politics are a little bit difficult. What do you think? Anyway, I thought, well, let me ask. I knew my previous colleague, who is head of gold in gold exploration Anglo American, Roy Correns. I said to him, look, have you seen something such as this? He said, yes, it's an epithermal gold deposit. We've never seen these in Africa, but we find them in South America. So I thought, different geological model. Is it worth a go? He said, yeah, no, sure, it's worth a go. So I went to John Teeling, my serial entrepreneur chairman. I said, look, I found this great project. Roy Correns, who's a technical expert here, reckons this could be a good thing. It's a new geological model. Mozambique, is a good country to invest in. And he immediately said, I've got a cash shell. I will raise the £100,000 to get it started. And then you must kind of carry on from there onwards. So that's exactly what we did. We put the money into a company called Zambezi Gold. It later changed its name to Swala Resources, where we added projects in Burkina Faso, Gabon, Zimbabwe, and some base metal projects in the DRC too as well, because we just came across these projects and these were interesting projects, interesting geological models. We then thought, well, we need to list this because this is the business model of the 162 group, is about listing and growing value. But often it's actually cheaper and easier to do a reverse takeover. So we did a reverse takeover of a listed company called Concordia Resource Corporation, as it was a lot cheaper than listing. And if we kind of fast forward 15 years ago, 15 years later, where this is now, and I did this as part of my homework for this presentation, because I was one of the pioneering directors, and my role was to get the thing set up and started and hand over to professional management here. It's now two different companies. One is called Marillion Resources Corporation, which is looking at rare earth elements in Tasmania. And another one is Kaizen Discovery, which is an exploration company in Peru. And that's the nature of juniors. You've got to reinvent yourself, because if commodity prices fall, if the political environment in a country goes south very, very quickly, if you can't raise money, you have to try and reinvent yourself to try and protect shareholder value. Because after all, as a director of one of these public companies, protecting shareholder value is your primary goal in the management of these companies. So that's now become Kaizen and Marillion, and I think I probably still have shares in actually both of them. The third and final example is Rockwell Diamonds. You may have heard of Rockwell Diamonds. It was an alluvial diamond producer in the Middle Orange or Douglas area of South Africa for several years, but it didn't start that way. This was a Hunter Dickinson company, which was initially started as a gold mining company in the United States in 1988, called Annabelle Gold Mines. Didn't kind of work out, so they changed it to copper in Chile, called Carissa Mining Ventures in 1994. It also didn't quite work out. So they then came across this diamond idea, Rockwell Diamonds, being one of the largest listed alluvial diamond producers in the world. And so the private company called HC Van Wyk reversed into Rockwell Diamonds in 1995 to create Rockwell Diamonds Inc. That was listed on the main boards of the Johannesburg Stock Exchange, the Toronto Stock Exchange, and the OTCBB market in 2006, and it had a value of just under 200 million rand. Sadly, things didn't work out. You may have read the newspapers over a few years ago in 2016, where the prices for diamonds just weren't achieved. Operating costs were going up, so they sold it to a private group. So like many things, I've used often in my discussion the analogy of a person, an incubator giving birth to a child, looking after it, giving it the food, giving it the right temperature, giving it the education, giving it the love, and the support that it actually kind of needs. Well, here is one which needed support at the end of its life, and it was transformed, still creating new jobs for private companies in the Middle Orange, but in different kind of scale. And in mining, you have that. You typically have with these very large deposits, a major starts off, followed by a not such a big major, followed by a mid-tier, followed by maybe another mid-tier, followed by maybe 1, 2, or 3 juniors, followed by private companies, and then that's the end, when it's kind of really kind of worked out at the end of the day. But there's always a piece for somebody, and there's always jobs, going back to what Rudy asked to talk about at the very beginning on these different ventures. So in conclusion, ladies and gentlemen, I hope this has been of interest to you. As I said, Rudy will have my notes, and I know UKZN published this recording, so you can listen to it in your own kind of spare time. The mining is an absolute fundamental requirement for sustainable development. I've given the rather tongue-in-cheek analogy around lithium, but everything that we have nowadays, whether it's a cell phone that you have, whether it's a computer we're looking at it from, it all requires mining. And I know mining is a dirty business, but you can't get away from it. You know, if we want to achieve sustainable development scenarios and we want to have economic growth. Mining from an NDP perspective in South Africa is really important. I think many of you may have forgotten about the National Development Plan in South Africa, but mining can be a significant economic contributor. Many people are talking about mining being a sunset industry in South Africa, but it does have the potential to be a sunrise industry. It just requires some of the things that I've been talking about around ideation, business incubation, financing, a bit of a friendly regulator, and all those kind of things to actually kind of make it work. But how do you actually de-risk it and actually make it work better? I have found from my research, and this is still very preliminary, that 50% of commercial discoveries, i.e. mines, i.e. businesses, are found by juniors or mining entrepreneurs in an ad hoc approach. It's not a corporate like an Anglo, where they'll probably have their own incubation or exploration department, and they will find 50% of them. The other 50% of people who've gone out with an idea saying, hell, I'm sure I found some copper staining on that farm out there north of the Waterberg in the Limpopo province. Let me go and have a look at that. And he goes and looks at it, and he kind of persuades a few mates to kind of come on board. And it's quite ad hoc. And that's certainly what the literature's shown me. And it's certainly been my experience actually over the last 20 years. But if you have these mining incubators, and it can be a 162 group model, it can be a Lundin group model, it can be a Hunter Dickinson model, it can be a model specific for Africa, you know, or a very different kind of model. It doesn't matter. You can de-risk, stimulate, and fast track mineral exploration and the mine development process. And that will contribute to economic growth. It will contribute to more jobs. And more importantly, not more importantly, as importantly, something which I mentioned earlier, more local entrepreneurial ownership of these kind of projects going into the future, rather than the government saying with a big stick, you must be owned X% by this particular group. The final kind of comments I'd like to say in parenthesis around this, and this came when I went to a very large conference, I think it was in the Northern Cape, where the Northern Cape Ministry of Mines, along with the country's Ministry of Mines, wanted to re-energize mining in the Northern Cape. I think I was the token explorer there. I don't mind being called the token explorer, and I was, I think, the only one to physically go there, because I believe it was important. But the IDC, and no disrespect to the IDC came up with a very bureaucratic, very fancy model about how to create these new businesses and about how to grow them. But I said to them, I said, I think you're missing the point. When you're looking at an exploration project, you're looking at an idea. You're backing somebody. There is no discounted cash flow. There are no financials. You are backing the abilities of that person. And in fact, when you go to more sophisticated markets such as the UK, Canada, and Australia, they have 3 criteria for when they look at investing in exploration or development projects. 1, political risk. We've got the Fraser Institute study for that. That's quite a good proxy. You can't run away from that. That is what it is. The second thing is geological prospectivity. We are blessed in spades in South Africa with that, as is Zimbabwe, as is Botswana. Fantastic. We've got fantastic geologists. And the third one is the success rate of your CEO of creating mines. Anybody can go out and find a deposit. I've often said that, but very few people can go out there and find a deposit and turn it into commercial reality. That's what they look for. They've tried to bureaucratize this process. It isn't a bureaucratic process. It's a very fast entrepreneurial process with a lot of insight actually built into it, with a lot of failure that's going to go behind it. If you go on to my chairman's presentation to the Junior Mining Indaba, he will say right at the front, he is a member of the 99% Club, which means he's had several companies which have lost 99% of their value because they haven't worked out. But equally, he has returned 20, 30, 40 times to shareholders. And on balance, if you invested in his companies, you would have made more than investing in the FTSE 100 index. So in conclusion, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you very much for your time, I feel that mining has a great place in Southern Africa. I think the process of ideation and business incubation has not just massive relevance in mining in Southern Africa, but also for any other form of business in Southern Africa itself. And I believe if those are really harnessed and you bring on the entrepreneurial flair which exists in this country, then I think you've got a wonderful platform for growth and large-scale employment in this country. So thank you very much, Rudi, indeed, for your time. And I hope your audience found this of some value.
James, thank you very much. You know, I always find your insights very, very interesting and very informative. We have a few minutes for, in fact, we've got about 30 minutes for few questions and answers. And whilst our guests, our delegates are thinking of some questions, James, I want to pose some questions at you. So you spoke about ideation. And I think that if you really drill down, you find that many people have very great ideas. But very few people have the courage to see those ideas through. Now, when you spoke about your chairman, Dr. Teeling, and the people who founded the Hunter Dickinson, what are their outstanding personality features that drove them to start a business, and perhaps that we can use and sensitize many people in South Africa? What do we need in order to kind of step into that space?
Gosh, Rudi, that's a fascinating question. And obviously, I won't be able to do it justice by giving it kind of momentary thought. But if I kind of just pull together what comes to mind, thinking about John Teeling, thinking about people like Lucas Lundin, I think the first thing is they are prepared to use their own money to grow it significantly. I think that's maybe one of the first things. They're not, you know, they're not happy living in kind of a corporate salaried environment. Secondly, they believe they can make a profound difference to the industry in which they're in. And thirdly, these are not detailed people. These are people who have a strong sense of business, whether it be whiskey or whether it be diamonds, and can actually pick up on the critical strands of running that business. One of the things that, maybe if I just add one small point, one of the things I've actually found in South Africa, when I compare it to several of the other countries I've worked in is that many people aspire to go and work for a corporate because it's a safe environment. Let me go and work for an Anglo American or a Standard Bank or something like that, where you have a highly structured job, you earn a very good salary, and you don't actually have to worry too much about the end of each month, rather than the kind of environment in which I live in, where it's public knowledge I didn't draw a salary for 4 months because we hadn't raised the money. That's the nature of the beast. But I was still protecting shareholders at the same time because I have a passion for growing something, and I have a passion for rewarding my hard-earned shareholders who've actually been on this journey for us. So it's I will have to think a lot more about this. I did, by the way, I did put a presentation together for the Geological Society a couple of years ago, where they asked me to compare what the role of a mining entrepreneur or an exploration entrepreneur with that of a corporate mining or exploration person. I can share that with you because I put a lot of that in that, but it doesn't directly answer your very deep question, Rudy, which is going to require, I think, some considerable thought.
Well, maybe we will have to have a third seminar to unpack that. James, you also spoke about incubation. And I'm a very strong believer that what we need to do is to convert our schools and our learning institutions into incubators. Now, we have, for example, at the University of KwaZulu-Natal, well over 40,000 students. And they all have access to the university's infrastructure and studying for all these degrees. But I want to come back to something in particular. You know, you spoke about the incubator. What do you think we should do within our education systems in order to promote an incubation type of methodology or thinking?
I think, Rudy, one of the biggest things here is about breaking down barriers between departments. And let me give you kind of two examples of this. When I was considering where to do my doctorate, Wits has a school of mines, or so they say they have, but they don't. The science disciplines, such as geology, report to science. The mining engineering and metallurgical disciplines report to engineering, who reports this way. One reports this way, one reports that way. I was very blessed to go to the Royal School of Mines in London many, many, many moons ago, where in your final year, of course, you studied all your geological stuff, but you did mining engineering, you did metallurgy, you did mineral economics, you did geophysical prospecting. You were given kind of the tools of the trade. So if you have a university which has all of these things, and you have like-minded people who are cross-disciplinary or transdisciplinary to actually set something up together in an informal ad hoc process, not in some kind of large bureaucratic, lots of rules and regulations, it won't work. That's, I think, how you should start it. Because certainly UKZN has got all the skills required to actually do it. It just requires those like-minded people to kind of get together to say, we're going to form a collective. I'm not even sure if that's the correct word, but a grouping of people who are going to help grow businesses, and then obviously do their work around ideation and business incubation, and actually start by doing, and then start to kind of grow it from there. I found that the more you bureaucratize this, the less successful it is when it works. You must be able to kind of give birth to these businesses and then let them fly, and then enjoy the benefits of letting them fly.
You know, when we conceptualize the topic "Mine Your Mind," besides the fact that he was playing on the fact that you come from a mining background, but it was also a case of getting people to really think very hard about what ideas they can come up with. And the mining of the mind is to think really, you know, to engage in very deep reflection. And I think particularly in a situation like South Africa, where we have such high unemployment, there's a culture of the government will provide.
Yes.
So many young people are depending on either, jobs being made available, job opportunities through one of the government initiatives. But in a low growth economic environment, that's not going to happen. Or if jobs are created, they are not sustainable jobs. So what we need to do is to really develop, a resilience and, to kind of generate the kind of creative thinking where people come up with opportunities and leverage those in order to create their own employment. I also like the idea, when you spoke about the collaboration. So a bunch of friends coming together, sharing some ideas, and taking one of those and really putting some energy behind it. So those are the kinds of things that I think we need to really embed within our learning institutions. People need to understand the basic mechanics of how you go about what is the step-by-step approach in order to take what you know and convert that into something of value.
Absolutely, Rudy. And I think what it needs is it does need like a cross-generational, not just a cross-disciplinary team, cross-generational too as well. You need to have people who are a little bit older, you need to have people who are a little bit younger, but you also importantly need to have people who've gone through this journey before. So they actually understand it and they've been through it. They've got, as my chairman would say, they've got scars on their back because they've had business failures, but they've had many more business successes than they've actually had business failures.
Yeah. James, I think we have dealt with the topic quite exhaustively. There have been no questions from our delegates. Ayanda?
Colleagues, we do have a hand from Mhlopekazi Mthombeni. Mhlopekazi, I'll unmute you now.
Okay.
Oh my, thanks for that. I didn't see that I actually raised my hand, but I'll put it down. Look, I think when I listened, most of it was around the mines and the space. And I think one of me joining, and I may have missed a portion thereof, was that how do you then start a business sort of from scratch, even if it's outside of the mining? Who do you talk to, and what are the things that you do? I understand that the good question was around the courage that is required, because yes, it takes a lot of that. But in terms of the practical sort of steps, because there's people that you need to talk to, you need to understand the legislation, but how do you then find all of these things into the space that you are sort of getting into? Yeah, that's my question. Thanks.
I think that's a very, very good question. It's something I didn't touch on. So thank you very much indeed for that question. And something that I do as a part-time, and I'll give you an example of it, is that you must be able to somehow create networks, because how are you going to get, as Rudy mentioned, this grouping of friends? It doesn't have to be grouping of friends, grouping of people together to actually explore something. And the obvious example is you go to conferences and you try and present at conferences, or at least sit on kind of panels at conferences, rather than just attending. Be someone there actually on the stage where you're presenting, so people can kind of engage with you and discuss with you afterwards. But what I've also found a lot as actually happens on social media. I found that actually over the past 3 months, I'm mentoring somebody in the railway space in South Africa. Now, she was bold enough to reach out to me and said, look, I know nothing about mining. You probably know nothing about railways, but, please could you give me a bit of assistance in terms of business, the legal side, the financial framework, all those. And I was delighted to. And hopefully I can actually add some kind of value to that process as well. So it's that kind of latching onto somebody in a very positive way, making it a very kind of positive relationship, for want of a better word, and being able to produce something and letting that person kind of take their wings and kind of fly from there onwards. So I think it's a lot more than just, I have a lot of people, wanting jobs, and I feel for them. I really feel for them. But I was particularly engaged around this approach because it was about help around creating and developing business. I did speak a lot about mining, but 90% of it's the same across any other business as well. So trying to help and kind of add value in that particular area. So in summary, conferencing is generally quite a good thing. I'm going to the African Mining Summit the week after next. I go there rather than I go to the Mining Indaba in Cape Town. Mining Indaba in Cape Town's got 15,000 people. I run a small junior. I will get lost amongst all of that lot. The Mining Summit in Botswana is 150 to 200 decision makers. So I will be able to network, and already before the conference itself, I can see 2 or 3 business opportunities which are developing, and people have approached me with business opportunities. And then secondly, and I know we spoke about this quite a bit at the first session, is around the management of your social media. It's not just having a LinkedIn, a good LinkedIn page, which I think you should have anyway, by the way, nice pictures, nice CV, but you must try and put a thought piece out if you can. I know Rudy does every week or thereabouts, which will then get people to see you as being a thought leader. That's a fancy term, but it is what it is. A thought leader in that particular industry, and people will then start to actually reach out to you. And then the third thing you might want to do actually on this, and I find this one particularly effective, is that there are people who've got tens or hundreds of thousands of followers on LinkedIn and the like. But if you make a comment on one of their comments, then you'll find that it will kind of mushroom up. A small kind of analogy thing, which came up actually over the weekend. I was very privileged to know an ex-Sierra Leonean ballet dancer called Michaela de Prince. She came to South Africa to dance with the Joburg Ballet before she was, really a big name in the American ballet company. And she comes from war-torn Sierra Leone. She comes from parents who were sadly lost during the struggle there, and was adopted and brought up. And she came here, and she came to perform at the Joburg Ballet. I made a few comments around that. Professor Thuli Madonsela kind of picked up on it and made some more comments. It then created a conversation of people at a level completely different from mine. I run a junior mining company. I'm not of that level, but we were able to create a conversation around Ubuntu, around values, around growth, and I was able to use Thuli as a hook because she used me as a hook. So if you try and use that as a bit of a strategy, you never know what might come up, the amount of help that might come up through things such as LinkedIn, and I always still call it Twitter, X, in that kind of environment.
Thanks for your response, James. I'm going to jump in here as well to just try to also provide some insight to Mhlopekazi. So you wanted to know the steps that you should follow. I think what you need to do is to look at how many problems are there that are you facing or are you seeing in your community. Entrepreneurs solve problems. If someone has a problem, they're looking for a solution. So when you identify a couple of problems, then you must try to come up with ways to address those problems. And if you can do so, that is already the first step towards becoming an entrepreneur. Ayanda?
Thank you, guys. Thank you.
Any more questions? Please do raise your hand so I can unmute you. It does not seem like we have any more questions.
Okay, so there's no further questions. Ayanda, thank you very much to you and your team for doing the back office work. To Hazel, I see that my colleague Henry is here as well. Thanks, Henry, for always supporting me. And then James, thank you for your willingness to share your insights, to always participate in the online events that we host under the Aerotropolis Institute Africa. What we are trying to do is to shift the needle. We are trying to make an exponential, incremental and exponential attempt to contribute towards knowledge development, to contribute towards economic growth, to contribute towards our young people in particular, to find the insights and the knowledge in order for them to have a better life going forward into the future. That's why we are doing this. So we will continue to bat down this road. And yes, you know, please do have a look at our AIA website. Follow the social media of UKZN to know what's happening in the space. And we will continue to go forward from here. So once again, James, the AIA team, UKZN, and our delegates for taking the time to be with us. Thank you very much. Until next time, bye-bye.